Alright everyone, spare no expense, we must fund a fence around Joe Biden's summer home because at that property, which is facing absolutely no credible threats, has faced, as far as I know, no threats whatsoever. Nobody even gives a damn about Biden, so it's not like paparazzi sits outside of his house or anything like that. They go down to the bike lane next to the beach and maybe they hover around there for a while on the right day and they get a shot of Biden falling over, but nobody is going to his house and taking selfies or anything like that. Nonetheless, the DOJ has commanded that the taxpayers of the United States liquidate $500,000 to create a security fence around Joe Biden's summer property to keep him safe from, I don't know, bumblebees or something like that, I suppose. They'll have little electric fly swatters on top that move back and forth, I'm sure. They must keep the steward safe from literally no threat whatsoever. Some people are comparing this to the southern border and saying, well, you know, Biden has no problem building a wall, fence, but a wall around his property to keep out the little people, which is, I guess, probably the real idea. There's a lot of homeless bums, you know, in the next neighborhood, maybe. His rich bitch ass couldn't handle it, so they have to keep them at an arm's length. He would rather go to the ice cream parlor after the homeless bums have been cleared off of the street. I guarantee the Secret Service has quite a time of it. Some people are comparing it to the southern border. They're like, well, you know, the government's willing to build this, but they're not willing to guard the border. That's sort of apples to oranges when you really think about it. If we're talking about threats to public officials, I would think that a much more meaningful conjecture would be this is more similar to hypocrisy over the Kavanaugh deal. You'll remember it was months ago that Brett Kavanaugh was almost killed by a violent leftoid commie, and this was after extra security of all forms was denied him. At the last moment, it was funny because Pelosi said, okay, we'll give their near family members an extra security detail so that they can be protected. But as far as like Kavanaugh and Barrett and all the others, they're on their own. Hire private guards, why don't you? Very, very funny. The double standard is actually fairly sheer, though. It's fairly disturbing. Here we have public officials that were routinely threatened for an extended period, had faced jeering crowds walking down their street, arguably breaking federal law in the process at times, by the way. Nothing was done. Now we have this property, which is extremely well secured anyway, for a man who's already surrounded by a dozen security officers wherever the hell he goes anyway, and we need to spend $500,000 despite there being no apparent, clear, and present threat to his life or limb. This is the kind of hypocrisy that we've gotten used to under the Beijing-Biden stewardship. It's the kind of wasteful dysfunction that we've seen for quite some time now, not just in the Biden administration, but really going back 100 years at this point. And it's definitely funny, but it really doesn't make sense to compare it to the southern border wall. For one thing, a 30-foot bollard wall is a little bit different from an anti-vehicle security fence topped with, I don't know, razor wire or however they're going to build it. I'm sure they'll make it decorative. They'll let Joe Biden in one of his dementia hazes, they'll give him a paint set, and they'll let him paint pictures on the security fence while pooping himself. It's basically his mental aptitude at this point. I'm thinking it's more about keeping people away from the property so they don't look in the window and accidentally see him getting injected with some CIA super drugs to keep him going. You'll notice that he's a lot more peppy when he's there, and it ain't just because he got extra sleep, because sometimes, supposedly, he doesn't really get that much of it. It's not that. It's not the change of scenery. It's not happy old man sundowning back on the home ranch. It's because they're giving him drugs. They dose him up to the eyeballs. Jill Biden apparently gives him undescribable pills before every speech. It does not surprise me. Sometimes he has that coke or amphetamine stare going on. Maybe they got him on ketamine for all I know. I'm almost thinking it's more about that because, again, there's no present threat to him. Nobody has threatened to attack Joe Biden in his summer home. They'd be suicidal to try because, again, he's surrounded by a dozen brawny security dudes at any given time anyway. His littlest security detail has enough firepower to just riddle the shit out of a huge crowd of people, and you're building a security fence? What purpose? You didn't do that for the SCOTUS justices when they were facing literally calls for their execution, literally calls for them and their families to be tortured and mutilated. Nothing was done. Some activist gets death threats against them. It effectively, the response depends on their political leanings at this point. It's a total dysfunction. It's total hypocrisy. It doesn't surprise me. It's also a waste of money. Look, he's the steward for a few more years maximum, assuming that he doesn't have a total brain fart moment and have to step down or something. Why even bother spending $500,000 on a security fence at his home, therefore? Well, who cares? What's the fucking point? Why don't you just keep him in the White House? Or, there is a silver lining here. You could deliberately design it without a gate and get him inside first, then finish up the fence and then not let him leave. You could say, okay, well, you're going to have to govern from here, but we're also you're not allowed to have Wi-Fi because you might do weird shit because we know how you interact with children. So, Kamala will have to handle things, I guess. Get her there too. They have a dinner party and Pelosi and all of the others. And just close the gate and walk off. I'm sure that they got plenty of wine in the wine cellar, so Pelosi will be just fine for an extended period of time. And that'd be funny. Of course, this is hyperbolic digression. The real hypocrisy, though, is imagine having to spend money, any amount of money, on securing a summer home for this fool who doesn't get threatened anyway. The idea that the right wing is so violent, they're going to take up arms and civil war, that's horseshit. Either that or this is an admission that they're actually crazy enough to indict Trump and they're worried about some form of reprisal. Hell, I bet all those plate carrier bearing people with the Gadsden flag still wouldn't be as violent as Antifa is on a weekend. They call dragging an old lady down the street by her hair and then throwing their shit at police just a normal work day. That's basically, it's the only way they're employable, generally speaking. Although one of them owned a pizza shop at one point. Imagine how many people's food he spat in over the years. That's about all. Peace out.